Hi, and welcome to the first episode of the Violent Podcast. You might already know that this is a spin-off from the German channel, and since I sincerely hope that all my German audience will at some point visit one of my seminars in Germany, there is always an element of advertising in each show, which won't be the case in the English version. So therefore it might feel a bit compressed, and it surely is. So if by any chance you don't want to miss out on this and you understand any German, I highly recommend you check out the original. So today's topic will be the phenomenon of knockout. This isn't actually the best rated of all of my videos, but it is certainly one of the rather interesting ones because there are so few topics in the self-defense community that are dealt with in so much depth without real knowledge. It is promised on the other hand, so you just have to shake the brain and it will shut off, or you just have to hit some nerves in the chin and it will make you go unconscious in a second, yet it really isn't how it works. So I divided this episode into 3 chapters, first of which will be a warning. We'll be briefly talking about the traumatic brain injury and the degrees of which. After that, we'll deal with the physiology of the knockout, so how it really occurs. And then I'll be talking about tactics, what to look for and what to avoid in order to really defend yourself concerning anything off and around the phenomenon of knockout. So anytime you rapidly accelerate or decelerate a human body, especially in the head, for example, by hitting it or by violently shaking it, there is a possibility for traumatic brain injury, which is a medical term describing either the commotion, the contusion, or the compression of the brain. So the first degree traumatic brain injury is called commotion of the brain, which literally means that the brain will be moving inside of the head and can come in contact with the inner side of the cranium, yet there will be no impact marks on the brain itself. There doesn't have to be unconsciousness now or later on, but if there is unconsciousness, it will be 10 minutes or less than that. Usually the commotion goes along with some kind of dizziness, again, not with an immediate unconsciousness, so this isn't the reason why people get knocked out. The second degree is called contusion of the brain. There you will have impact marks on the brain itself, there will be some kind of swelling on the brain, there can be unconsciousness now or later on, 10 minutes or longer than that, but again, this is not the reason why people lose their consciousness, it's not the reason for a knockout. Even in the compression of the brain, the third and most severe kind of traumatic brain injury, there doesn't have to be immediate or later onset unconsciousness. If there is unconsciousness, it is 60 minutes or longer than that. This usually occurs when you put something inside of the head, like an impact weapon, like an axe, like a hammer, or if the skull is broken and parts of the cranium push onto the brain, which really isn't that good with dealing with too much pressure. But there are a ton of cases where guys have things stuck in their head and they're perfectly fine. Well, they won't be perfectly fine forever, I guess, but they are not unconscious. So the traumatic brain injury, on the one hand, is not the reason for the knockout. It is not about shaking the brain. It is not about putting pressure on the brain or making the brain flip inside of the head. And all of that is nonsense. But all of those states require immediate medical attention. So for you guys who spar a lot, who box around much, get knocked out, check out your doctors, go to a hospital, get checked out, because there's always the danger of internal cranial hemorrhaging. The brain isn't that good with tolerating too much pressure, and hemorrhaging is one of the best ways to maximize pressure in a short time span. So make sure that you go to a hospital. You'd really regret not having that checked out, because there have been some cases of immediate brain death due to unnoticed internal hemorrhaging. So how do you inflict a proper and immediate knockout? There is basically 3 ways, none of which really have much to do with your chin, although your chin plays a certain role, rather indirect role in the second one. First off though, your medulla. The medulla is your regulation system at the base of your brainstem. It's right underneath the bony portion in the back of your head, and it regulates your respiration. It has a lot to do with the induction of reflexes like the gagging reflex, swallowing reflex. You have certain cardiovascular functions that are stored there, and it really is so important that if you were completely healthy but your medulla would be destroyed, you'd be dead, and other way around. If you'd be completely destroyed but your medulla would still be intact, you would live. You'd be in a coma for sure, but you'd still be breathing. So how do we know it is also accountable for your knockout? Because there is a problem with ethics commissions in every scientific experiment, especially if you're trying to harm a person. I believe in the early 20th century that was way easier with ethics commissions. And there was this guy from Germany, of course, Mr. Breslauer, who wanted to debunk the myth of the frontal lobe to be responsible for the knockout. So he locally anesthetized a dog and went through the snout with electrodes, putting pressure on certain areas of the brain. And he could put pressure almost everywhere without inflicting a knockout. But when he reached the medulla and he pressured the medulla, the dog was sleeping. So this is how we know it from a scientific way. And it is also the reason why it is illegal in MMA or in boxing to hit the back of the head, and why it can be lethal to fall unbraked on the pavement if you're hit. How does it happen in a street fight when you're not being hit directly in the back of the head? And this is easily explainable through the counter-coup phenomenon. Basically, when you're receiving or delivering a blow to the front of the head, your head will tilt backwards. Your brain, though, stays relatively in place and will initially come in contact with the front of your head. This is called a coup injury. So this is the initial impact. This one, though, isn't as hard as the next one, because when your head goes back to the end of the range of motion, or if it hits a wall, hits the pavement, this deceleration is almost unbraked. The frontal one is braked because you're reflexively putting a lot of tension into your muscles that would decelerate your head. And it's again why boxers lift their shoulders and crank it forwards and lower their chin, just to reinforce that tension. But the back one doesn't have that. So the counter-coup injury is almost all the time much harder. It's unbraked, and this is where your medulla gets the hit from the back. The second way for a knockout is putting pressure on your balance organ. Full disclosure, this technically isn't a proper knockout because you really don't lose your consciousness, but you know the feeling of really, really shaky knees? This is what we're going for with the second one. If you put pressure on your chin, like hitting it full on, the pressure would translate to your mandibular bone, into your mandibular joint, and there it attaches to your temporal bone. The temporal bone has access to the petrous portion. And the petrous portion, Petrus, you know, this guy from the Bible, the rocky one, it is so hard that it's almost completely translate the pressure without any deforming. And inside of that is your inner ear, and that houses the balance organ. If you punch the chin really hard, especially from the front, you would almost always find that pressure to be translated into your inner ear that pushes on the balance organ, and this is why you're having trouble staying on your feet. It is comparable to a blow directly to the ear. There you don't have the mandibular pressure translation. It is directly to the inner ear, and you get the almost same effect. All right, now with the last one, guys, we're really on the rather complicated side of things. This one is called a syncope. And a syncope really only is a medical term describing your general collapse, meaning the sagging of the blood, the loss of muscle tone that puts you down rather quickly. In our case, we're talking about the vasovagal syncope or a neural mediated syncope. Vasovagal referring to your vagus nerve, you probably heard about this one. It's a system that puts you rather down than up. And vaso referring to a vasodilation, which will be going on, so a widening and opening of your vessels in order to decrease blood pressure. The neural mediation comes into play because we're talking about a reflex, and this one is innervated by nerves. So inside your internal carotid artery, you have a point called the carotid sinus, and there you find a lot of mechanical receptors that measure pressure from the blood going up to the brain. As I told you before, the brain and nerves generally can't deal very well with pressure. So this is a protective reflex. When there's too much pressure, it will force a decrease in blood pressure, which can lead to unconsciousness. How can you trigger this one? Obviously by hitting in the neck from the side. So you've probably seen that from the spear system, where you crash with your forearms into the neck, or in Wing Chun where you have the Faksar movement that hits this point. But you can also have this by indirect torsion. Means if you have an uppercut, for example, that stretches the neck, all those muscles keeping your neck and keeping your head on your shoulders will contract, and any contraction, any shortening also means a thickening, and these muscles can push onto these receptors, telling your brain that there will be too much pressure coming up and the reflex will be executed. Alright guys, so putting it all together, there really only is 3 ways to achieve a proper and immediate knockout. First one is You interfere with the medulla, putting pressure on it by either directly hitting the back of the head or via the contrary coup mechanism when you hit it in a frontal plane. Second one really isn't a knockout but rather knockdown, is the interference with the balance organ by either striking the ear or transferring the pressure through the bony parts of the face. And the last one is the syncope, meaning either if you hit the neck directly from the side or via the torsion by having an uprising or a heavy shake of the head. All right, talking tactics now. And this is where it always gets a bit too passionate too quickly for my taste. So let me please preface this by kind of summarizing what we've learned up to this point. First, messing around with the brain too much is really kind of dangerous, because every time you hit somebody in the head really hard and or repeatedly, or you strike the back of the head or you strike the neck, there is a possibility for brain damage, which is a bad thing because it can lead to death or permanent disability. Now, I do understand the guys who say better be tried by 12 than carried by 6, but I also assume that if you're really interested in self-defense, you are also interested in self-preservation, and one of the easiest and quickest way to end your life as you know it is to spend several years in prison, where you only get shitty jobs after that, and you might become someone's girlfriend you really don't like, and of course there's the psychological implications. So if you take a life or make somebody a vegetable, this stays with you forever, and this isn't a path you want to choose as a default. So from a purely strategical point of view, looking for the explicit knockout is very dangerous, and I would urge you to shy away from this. Being more pragmatic, I do absolutely see why it is so tempting to look for the sudden knockout, because just think of all the problems you could save yourself from. For example, the problem of being hurt yourself. You have a very short scenario when you just can touch somebody in a special place and he falls asleep, right? Or everything that comes on top of this, like a second or third party who joins the fight. You would have more resources to deal with those guys if you just end the first one quickly. And if you're there already, why not end the third and fourth guy just as quickly? So this is tempting, of course. Yet in the second chapter, we learned that you really cannot predict a knockout to happen. Even if you stick stuff inside of someone's head, you can't really promise that he will go down. This is just not how the brain works. So from a rather practical, a tactical point of view, you can't predict it. So where can we compromise? And this is where glorious psychology comes to our rescue, because even the worst bad guys in the world do not want to get hurt. Just take your local jihadist terrorist. He doesn't want to get hurt. I know he tells you he wants to die for his face and stuff, but he really doesn't. Most of these guys, well, almost all of these guys, suffer under immense delusions when it comes to dying and the romantic ways of fighting. And you can see this directly if you see them fight. They fight like cowards. They hide, they don't look where they're shooting. Nothing is romantic when it comes to death and to dying and to being hurt. This usually is something entirely else than what they think it was. This can happen to you as well, because the problem here lies in the reality meeting fantasy, and it doesn't really match, right? So all the build-up, all the energy, all the motivation goes to shit when your fantasy doesn't go along with reality. So please do not look for a knockout, knocking somebody dead in the head 20, 30 times, expecting a knockout. Doesn't happen. You will use all your motivation. Rather look for making somebody think he will get hurt. And of course, this you can do by hitting someone in the head. I would just urge you not to look for the knockout. When you hurt somebody, or if you make him think he's getting hurt, and this is a difference. You don't look for trauma, but look for making him think he's getting hurt. Hit him in the head, of course. Just stop when you see the window of opportunity which you need, which is really all you need to make your escape, to look for an improvised weapon, to threaten him or her, and of course to call for help. Really anything that you can do with this window of opportunity that is created by hitting someone severely in the face, in the head, but stop at some point when you have that window of opportunity, you just don't have to knock somebody out. It's like the metaphor of shooting to kill. Really, almost nobody shoots to kill. Ask any policeman, ask most military guys. You shoot until there is no danger. There is usually no need to really kill somebody. And this is the same with knocking somebody out. If it comes to the knockout, it happens accidentally, it happens incidentally, but really not, because it was your intent to do this. Now, when it comes to your training, I really advise you to shy away from those guys who promise you the quick knockout, because those guys either know nothing about the knockout, or they're throwing you under the bus when it comes to your psychological well-being and or your legal problems that you will most likely face if you're really trying hard to knock somebody out. So prepare yourself for real confrontation. Don't look for the knockout. Look to make somebody think he's getting hurt. Create that window of opportunity where you can get out and off the X. All right, guys, this was episode 1 of the Violent Podcast. We covered everything from the dangers of the knockout to how a knockout would work, up to the tactics of and around the knockout. I hope you could learn something from this. If you liked it, please leave me a like. Go into the comments now and let me know which other topics might be of interest to you. So thanks for your attention and see you next time.